Welcome to the Buy Box Experts podcast. We bring to light the unique opportunities brands face in today's e-commerce world.
Hey, and welcome to the Buy Box Experts podcast. This is Eric Stopper. I am joined today by Chris Mccabe, and Chris and I have recorded in the past, but we wanted to do something a little bit special. We're going to do another topic here specifically surrounding this time of year where Prosper is happening, and a lot of people are, they're getting their manufacturing finished in China, and so like everybody's thinking about pushing products really heavily and preparing for Q4. So lots of relevancy here. Chris Mccabe, he is a prolific voice in the Amazon space. I've said that before. I've had several conversations with him. He is amazing. And so we are going to talk about how to run a white hat business in a black hat world on Amazon. Chris, welcome to the show once again.
Thanks. This is my favorite topic lately with Prosper coming up and defending your brand against black hat attacks. Actually, not just brands. It's for private label and resellers. So you must be hearing about this topic a lot at Buy Box Experts.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, man. There's a lot of different ways to define black hat when in regards to Amazon. And so I think that's probably a fair place for us to start. Mm-hmm. Is in your mind, what is black hat in a general sense, and then specifically for Amazon?
Yeah. And well, black hat tactics, where it comes from, the definition originally was fraudulent behavior. If left unchecked, whether that was stolen credit cards or people hacking, taking over accounts. We worked on all that stuff when I was a fraud investigator at Amazon, which of course blended into my seller performance related marketplace seller investigative skills and experiences. But in the Amazon context, black hat has kind of become its own thing because Amazon has its own ecosystem. You need your own definition. And the definition is expanded from just leaving a fake negative feedback for somebody or using a service to leave bad feedbacks and then later bad product reviews to really all kinds of nefarious behavior that can result in an attack on your competitors attacking you. This is where the workshop came from at Prosper. This isn't the happiest topic to be kicking around at a conference, but people had to learn survival skills, if you will, to defend themselves. Otherwise, black hat tactics will rule your world and ruin your day and your month and your year if you don't stop them.
So we are, right, like Buy Box Experts, definitionally, right, then by nature of our name even, we're all about channel control, channel governance, helping you understand how to build a really solid foundation for Amazon. Because up until this point, a lot of people in this space have just said like, oh, like Amazon is another channel that I sell through. And 51% or more of e-commerce transactions were done on Amazon. And so I think that we can pretty much put that type of thinking to rest, right? If you are not focusing on Amazon as a major channel, as a product company, you're either Nike or you are foolish, right? This is a big deal, and you should definitely pay attention. I get people, I get two types of people that come to me. Number one are the folks who are just getting their trash kicked, right? They've got lots of resellers. They've got, some have had, Chinese companies have hired, they've hired Chinese companies to just like farm negative reviews, for their competitors. Right. And they're really just kind of despairing and they don't know how to recover. Mm-hmm. The second type of person are those who are like, hey, so Amazon, right? All the special tips and tricks and like the ways to get ahead, like what can you share with me? And since I'm representing an agency, right? Like let's put the disclaimer on the table right now. We're partners with Amazon, so we have to have a certain level of white hat, meaning 100% white hat in our business. We can't do any of the underhanded stuff. And this concept is mostly relevant if you remember like back in the days when the Google algorithm was like the thing that everybody paid attention to. Right. They released like Panda recently, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And that was specifically to combat some black hat tactics on the Google side of things. And that's been an ever evolving thing for them. And so when it comes to Amazon, there are still lots of things that you can do that are underhanded, right? There are ways to get ahead.
You can get away with a lot without the company finding you right away, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking to the guy that had to go and hunt all of the evil creatures in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard when they're everywhere. You know, you only got one sword and they're just coming at you at all angles. So
that's how I often feel.
Well,
because we have long-term relationships with brands and sellers who have been around for a long time who weren't getting attacked until it started getting really bad, which again gets back to what's the definition of black hat on Amazon. At this point, it's almost anything nefarious that's anti-competitive behavior, misleading, dishonest, abusive. I mean, you could file it under so many different teams. Why is Amazon creating so many different new teams, which aren't so new anymore, but abuse prevention? You know, why is there a seller abuse manager? Why are there entire teams dedicated to product review abuse? Well, guess what? It's because in the expansion of the entire marketplace and Amazon's rapid growth, this has come along with it for the ride. People who are willing to exploit gaps and loopholes, people who are willing to say, I want you to whisper in Amazon's ear and do something special for me. Like you said, you're 100% white hat, so am I. And so are legitimate consultants who aren't out offering tricks and how to game an algorithm or trick a system, because that's a short-term strategy. I'm guessing Buy Box Experts mostly has clients who are in it for the long haul. And so do I. I mean, at least, I mean, there are some people who get their account suspended, we get them reinstated. They don't necessarily want to be with us for years. But everyone else, all the active sellers that we're working with, we're with every month, every day of that month. And those are people who aren't looking for a cheap, quick score, looking for a quickie tactic to trick an algorithm or, you know, trip up a competitor. I mean, that's not what a legitimate business does, number one. Number two, that's not a long-term Amazon play.
So I have a few thoughts, and I want to unpack a bit of what you were saying there. I think one really good place to start is something that I've preached for a while. Now, let's be clear. I love Amazon. Amazon has created my career for me, and I have generated lots of wealth. My team members have generated lots of wealth for our brand partners, and Amazon is great. I've got family members that are employees and executives there. So I'm tied into them pretty closely. I respect Jeff. I've read all the books, right? Like, this is my space. Yeah. But one underlying assumption that everybody needs to understand is that Amazon does not care about the sellers the way that they care about the buyers, the customers on Amazon. They're all focused on the customer experience, low prices, better pictures, better brand experience. And so if you're thinking that Amazon is just going to pander to your every need, you're wrong. Assume that they don't care. So that's one of the first things that I want to do. But on the flip side of that, you were on a team that was meant to help people, right? Like the customer service team at Amazon, they want to help. Their metrics are based off of how many of their cases are successfully solved. And so Amazon is trying to combat this, because more low-priced items on the platform means more customers, which means more transactions, which means more money in their pocket. And so don't assume that they just aren't going to help you, but you need to be able to get them to help you the right way. Right. And I think that's kind of where this conversation goes, is how do you leverage Amazon and the teams and tools that they've already put in place to make your business legitimate and this beautiful just fountain of wealth for your entire enterprise. And so
understanding the teams and understanding their internal function, which it's still, even in 2020, so many sellers don't get this stuff. The sooner you get it, the sooner you'll have that fountain of wealth you're just talking about, and the less time you'll spend fending off competitors, trying to discern what Amazon's trying to tell you in a message. From my way of thinking, to defend it, to create a brand, launch it, be successful, then defend it, then continue to grow, you have to be a realist. You have to be maybe a little bit cynical, like you said. Maybe they don't care, but you can make them care, and you can also do your homework on your side and be aware of how these teams operate. You don't have to be me having worked there for 6 years. You don't have to be me having consulted for 6 years since. You can actually learn and apply a lot of these skills and report things that are terrible and abusive that are happening to you the right way, instead of a way that's just spinning your wheels, that's going to waste your time and their time. And like you were saying a moment ago, understand where they're coming from and what their interests are, not just what you need, what your interests are, You can also even turn it around sometimes and think about, what can I do for them? I'm talking to a category manager today who can maybe help me expand my presence within this really important category. Maybe you sell in more than one category. Am I only going to go into this conversation, which could only last 15, 20 minutes? First call with a category manager, thinking about, I want you to tell me what you are going to do for me to help me with my problems. Or are you going to present yourself as, hey, I can be a player in this category. I'm going to make you look good because I'm doubling or tripling my revenue this year. And I'm launching 3 new products next year. Will it be tough given, some of the product reviews we've had or some of the struggles with seller performance? It might be tough. And I'm hoping you and I can have a conversation about that when it happens. But my focus is on growth, selection, offering good product, good prices. And I've got a whole bunch of great positive reviews that we already received on some of our products, so on and so on and so on. You're helping them solve a problem, quote unquote, problem that they have. It's part of their job. And that's something sellers sometimes miss. They're focused on like, what can you do for me? Well, you're a small part of a giant company. Think about what you could do for them as well.
Well, the way that I approach virtually anybody that I do business with, anybody that's in a customer service relationship with me, or at least I try to do this, right? I'm not perfect. But I assume that the person on the other end of the line from me is just a normal loser like me, right? They go home, they have a totally normal life. They're totally normal people, right? They got in a fight with their spouse at the beginning or the end of the day, right? They've got kids that are getting bad grades or good grades. They've got extracurriculars that they engage in. And if you speak to that with them, you're going to have a much better time, right? Yeah. So if you're trying to solve the issues that come from the fact that other people are doing black hat stuff, it might as well do you the highest order of service to enlist Amazon to your help by treating them like human beings. And I think that that's one thing that we've become particularly good at, and I'm sure that your team is good at, is when you submit an appeal, a legitimate appeal, you're talking to a person, right? And you're trying to get them to take some sort of action that will benefit both of you. So the way that you talk to them, the way that you ask for things, the way that you present your plan of action when there's an issue that gets escalated to seller performance is going to absolutely impact the way that problem is solved.
Totally. Agree. Sometimes you have to be a little pushy if they're not reviewing anything and they're sending you the same message over and over, but you can be positive pushy, or you can be pushy where you're just bagging on how they do everything. I understand the frustration. There's a temptation for people to do that, but it's not an opportunity to vent. And as you were just saying, you might be venting at the entirely wrong person or wrong team, because you don't understand what happened in the background. They might understand it, and maybe just a lack of perspective. They want you to understand it, even though you don't work there the way they do. But like you said, they're not being treated the way they want to be treated. They're not being written to or spoken to the way they want to, and they're not going to read it. They're just going to toss it.
Now, in my mind, there are kind of 3 levels of what I would consider black hat on Amazon. The first one is what your customers do to you, right? Like, there's a reason that you put traps where you see footprints, right? Like animals, and we as humans, as animals, we will always take the path of least resistance, right? So if I can push, and I try not to do this, right? I try to return it legitimately, but some people will say that it's like damage or the wrong size. Right. Everyone's gonna do that. Right. And so then you have to be really good at customer service and a whole bunch of other things. The second layer is what I would call like tactics, marketing tactics. And then the third one is when they're actually like targeting your business. It's business. I don't really have a name for it, but it's when they're leaving illegitimate reviews or they're
sabotage.
Sabotage is probably the best way to put it. So let's try to hit on all 3 of those if we can. I think customer service is probably the easiest, the best solution to making sure that the black hat at the very bottom of the funnel with your customers is solved and resolved. But I want to talk about kind of the marketing tactics for a second. And we'll get to kind of the sabotage piece of it and how you can help with that. But we as an agency, we don't do any gray hat, right? Like we don't even try to step close to the line. But
I don't
me,
even believe in gray hat, by the way. I'm living in a black and white world over here. So,
so you know what? This is good because I have a brand, and I'm not going to say what it is on this podcast, but I have a
Yep.
brand that I try every tactic possible just to test, right? I
Mhm.
try to test heuristics, how people purchase the product. I even tried like putting a little blue, like a blue prime dot in one of my first pictures
Okay.
to give the illusion of prime to see if that increased my conversion rate. I will
Oh,
not
wow.
report
Interesting.
exactly what that did, but like that's my
Yeah.
test account. And I try all these practices to see what Amazon's response will be, and they have never shut me down once. And
Interesting.
so I'm wondering
Yeah.
what kind of advice would you give to the sellers who are considering these types of gray hat marketing tactics?
I mean, consider the risk before you. It might not be great at Amazon. That's one thing you should think about first. They might believe you're creating annoyances for them. They might not take your account away right away, but they might send warnings, start deleting listings. I can speak to my personal experience when I was investigating accounts when I was in seller performance, and I was assessing merchant risk on a daily basis, and I was looking at any attempt to kind of circumvent a rule or game a system. I might say, you know, this is kind of borderline. I could do nothing. I could just pass this investigation, but this also appears to be creating customer confusion, bad buyer experiences. Some people say items not as described. This isn't what I hoped for, whatever it might be. It wasn't what they thought was worth their money. And when you see that enough times, again, thinking like an Amazonian for a second, it's a risky marketing tactic because if you think like an Amazonian, you have to consider the hundreds or thousands of times they've seen that same trick. Maybe
Right.
not thousands, maybe they've only seen it a dozen times. But it only takes 2, 3, 4 times in a row for me to see something reported as an investigator, to pick up a report, this is abuse, this is a catalog error, whatever, and to take action on it, to get to the point where I've sort of been frustrated with it. This is creating work for me and my team. And the more these come in, if we screw one of them up, one of our heads could be on a platter for missing it, even if it's just 1 out of 100.
Right.
So it's actually risky for me as an investigator to miss something, and it's all because a tactic like that was employed. So what does that give me the incentive to do? I can tell you again, I'm not going to speak for every investigator I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, I would get to the point, especially if I saw the same account twice, I would get to the point where I'd start deleting listings and sending warnings for policy violations. I wouldn't suspend as quickly as they do today. I don't think anyone anticipated to suspend as easily as they do now. But I would take listings away, and that would be an annoyance for the seller. And if they, you know, some people out of spite would relist, then I would delete all of their listings for a secondary violation. And then if they kept doing it, obviously you're suspended. But to that person, I guess what I'm building up to is, to that person, it's not a gray hat marketing tactic. It is out in the marketing world. Like, hey, try this out. This isn't 100% black against the rules. But for an Amazonian, if they're seeing games being played or you're trying to circumvent something,
They'll play
to
the
them
game
it's
back.
to them it's just bad behavior, and they'll play the game back, which is, by the way, I have power over you.
Mm-hmm.
I can do things to you that you can't do to me. You can complain about me. And I saw some emails where somebody said, you know, I don't think you needed to, not to me personally, but to Amazon. Why did you cancel all of my listings? And I was thinking in my head, well, you know what, if my manager ever called me out on the carpet and said, well, this guy has a point. You canceled 1,000 listings of his and he only had a few. I would go back into the annotations and say, well, you know what? We warned him a month ago and we warned him 2 weeks ago and he didn't get the point. So I can justify it. I'm not saying that plays out exactly that way today, but I would have been able to defend it. And I would have felt good about doing it, because that does discourage the person from continuing to do those things.
Right. Yeah. Punishment is is a pretty good way of getting people to stop doing an action.
Mhm.
You usually want to reward good action, right? Like you want
Right.
to spend lots of money on advertising and put better pictures in,
Right.
and they make more money.
Right.
One question that
You
I've
get
always
left
had,
alone. If you're doing well,
Right.
I mean, the
don't have
reward
an
isn't
ally.
necessarily a gift box. It's, you don't hear from me.
no scrutiny. Yeah, if you're under the microscope of Amazon, that's not the place you want to be in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're the sun and you're an ant.
Right. And you're doing a brand, you've solicited product reviews, and you've got messaging for that, I'm sure, for your buyers. There are some people who have been warned multiple times for your you're playing this so-called gray hat review request game. And obviously that subject, you can easily pick out a few tactics, call them gray and not black. But once you've been warned for something like that, you have to make sure you reel it in and you're much more conservative. That's kind of my main advice for people who get warned. Don't start saying, well, but my interpretation of that policy is, and I went to that Facebook group and I had 3 or 4 sellers say that they agreed with me. No one cares.
Right. You're going to Moses and you're trying to analyze the 5th commandment, right? And get him to make a slight change there. So one question that I've always had is, if something gets flagged, right, you take some sort of action based off of the frequency of something coming up. How does it make its way into the terms of service? How does it actually become black and white when it was, quote unquote gray?
I mean, people thought something like, we're going to report these guys for selling a counterfeit version of our product because it's considered materially different. That didn't used to show up in the code of conduct violation suspension notification. They added it later because people were trying to use their own little loopholes for explaining that anything could be reported, justifying that anything could be reported as counterfeit simply if I don't want a seller selling my stuff on Amazon.
Right.
So that made the leap because there were thousands and thousands of people trying to exploit that loophole. And then you start seeing rewritten parts of terms of service. And going back to product reviews, they've rewritten a lot of that content ever since fake reviews became so bad, because they now consider that manipulating not just a buyer experience, but a buyer, and manipulating algorithms and sales rank that'll hurt other sellers. You're essentially hurting Amazon's reputation and other sellers and buyer experience all at once.
And yours.
When you break rules like that.
Yeah.
So, that's a surefire way to get it in the TOS.
Right. Yeah. And for those listening, right, like Amazon is very much like your local government. They don't care if you didn't see the speed limit sign.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's not their responsibility to educate you. You have to go and educate yourself. So make sure that you keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about sabotage, because that's the world that you really play in, and that's a big reason that we wanted to have this conversation.
Yeah. We had to pay a lot more attention to this, I would say, starting in 2018, and that's when I first started offering services, defending brands against attacks, helping people report abuse to Amazon teams. Back in 2018, and then into last year, we saw that a lot of sellers were still complaining that they were reporting things appropriately and not getting any response at all. We struggled with that. I think a lot of sellers, consultants, everybody was having trouble reporting things and seeing meaningful review and action on the Amazon side. The good news, and this is something I'll be talking about in more detail at Prosper next month in Vegas, but the good news is a lot of heads have rolled and teams have changed leadership and management. And there are changes we can evaluate in a couple of months if those changes were as positive as we hope they will be. But at least Amazon's aware of how bad this is. They're aware of the need to make changes. They're aware that they have to either rotate around some managers or in some cases push them out entirely if people weren't cutting it and they weren't taking the problem as seriously as sellers have to and as our clients have to. And the kinds of sabotage, the nature of sabotage has changed. It used to be simple things like leaving negative feedback for a competitor and buying from them. I was lucky maybe when I was in seller performance and using the tools, sellers were really sloppy and basic about this. They would use their own buyer account to buy from a competitor, just to complain about how bad the product was. I mean, this is like
use personal accounts from like
they use like ancient history, sloppy, disorganized tactics. There weren't entire black hat companies dedicated to doing this for you in those days, and now there are. But the good news is Amazon has created some of these additional teams. There's PRA, product review abuse, didn't exist a few years ago. That's a newer team, newish. And there's a seller abuse. There's a head of seller abuse. There's a new head of seller abuse. There's a new head of product review abuse. I mean, if Amazon knew or thought that they knew this was being taken care of and that sellers' concerns were being addressed, they would not have changed leadership on these teams. But last fall, Q4, November, October, December, a lot of heads rolled, a lot of changes were made. And now you can identify, at least, maybe not on LinkedIn, but you can figure out who at least the teams are, even if not the leaders of those teams. And you can start saying, hey, I need to escalate this. No one's doing anything about it. I know you have new leadership. I would like a senior investigator or a manager level team member or just a manager to review my case because I've got this kind of proof and this kind of proof and this kind of proof. If you don't have anything useful to report, then I'm not recommending that people escalate it like that. If you have specifics and they're ignoring them, then you at least have somewhere new to go. If that team doesn't perform, then yes, you have to go back to executive seller relations and some other escalation paths. But sabotage is well known by Amazon. It's well known by us. At least the elephant in the room has been acknowledged and we know it's being addressed instead of everyone putting their heads in the sand.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
we've touched on this over the length of this episode in a couple of different ways, but if you had to kind of wrap everything up and summarize everything, how do you run a white hat business in a black hat world on Amazon?
First of all, understand if you're hiring a third-party consultant, understand if they're black hat or not, understand what they're doing with their time on your behalf. You've paid them. Maybe spend some time understanding where some of that fee goes as well, in terms of, are they white hat in their dealings with Amazon, or are they doing shady, bad behavior that, actually they're doing it on your behalf. So even if you claim later that you weren't aware of it, you're kind of on the hook for that too, at least partially. So understand which consultant you're hiring and how they're performing the work on your behalf. Everyone knows there's lots of black hat companies out there, and a lot of them would not exist unless they either used unauthorized access to company employees or company teams, or sometimes they're just faking that they have that access and they're just out there to kind of spin you in circles. But that's a seller's responsibility to at least do some due diligence and figure out which consultant or expert, quote unquote, you're paying. The second part of that is do some homework and spend some time, whether it's nights or weekends if you can't do it during the business day, but learn about how internal teams work and how investigators think and how they'll interpret an abuse report. If you're being sabotaged by a competitor and your images are being swapped out and there's some old Vendor Central loophole that's being exploited and catalog abuse is affecting you and your sales, understand what's happening on the inside when you report something. Spend time with people like me who have worked there, or at least with somebody who's expert and knowledgeable about how teams assess reports, how they review them, how you can escalate it if it gets stuck. Every year, I guess, I'm going to a large conference like Prosper, and I'm talking to sellers that have these major gaps and problems that are costing them tons of revenue, and they have no idea how it works on the inside. And trust me, there are resources, and you don't necessarily have to pay for a lot of those resources. I write a blog on my website. I give interviews all the time. We're talking about it right now. I'm not being paid by buy box experts to talk about this stuff. So there are resources, but you also have to have a bit of a, BS detector to make sure that you're listening to the right stuff. Don't listen to the wrong people. Have a way of understanding what's fake knowledge, what's a fake guru versus a real one. And then beyond that, just have a thick skin and not just be savvy, but understand and don't be naive about what selling on Amazon is, because you might, if you're successful, you might have a good chance of being attacked at some point, at least on the ASIN level, if not your entire account. But understand that it's not personal, I guess. I know it feels personal if you put a lot of effort into a company and a product and you're getting all these fake reviews for unsafe products or fake products. But understand that this is just how the game is played right now. The smart strategy is to recognize that, to put emotion to the side and to start strategizing how to troubleshoot it. So you're attacked by somebody saying you have fake products or counterfeit products. Well, guess what? If you have bulletproof, infallible supply chain documentation and you have a pretty good sense of how that can be appealed and handled quickly, or escalated and then handled quickly, then you're going to survive that and you're not going to be impacted that much by it. It's much better to put that emotion into the strategy side of things than to vent or to, complain. I understand the frustration and the complaints. Believe me, I hear them all day, and I think most of them are valid, but that's not as productive or practical as working on, a battle plan and a solution.
Right. Yeah. And don't lash out. Don't try to use the same poison, because it's just gonna come back and bite you in the butt.
Yeah.
Chris,
And also, when you write to Amazon Teams and you say, you guys are all phony, you're all fake, you're all crooked.
trash.
Yeah, there might be something legitimate that you're complaining about, like somebody on a catalog team or brand registry or whatever did something that they shouldn't have done to your listings or your account. But again, circling back to our initial point or your point, it's not necessarily somebody in seller performance who did that. Even if it was totally shady and you are totally correct, you're screaming at the wrong person. And just keep that in mind. I know it's not easy to navigate all these channels, but just remember that it's counterproductive to scream at the wrong man or woman who's reading that message.
I couldn't agree more. Chris, I will see you at Prosper, and hopefully everybody who is watching this on YouTube or listening to this podcast will also come and chat with us and come to the panels. Get involved. We've got a great program planned this year. Lots of great speakers, and we'd just love to see you. Chris, anything else that you want to share with everybody here?
Just lastly, the workshop, Black Hat Tactic Defense, that's on March 23rd that afternoon. And then the seller performance panel that I'm sitting on is the next day, the 24th, Tuesday. So yeah, looking forward to seeing people. It's an exciting time of year, like you said, and I'm looking forward to getting out to Vegas soon.
See you soon, Chris.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Buy Box Experts podcast. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web, and we'll see you next time.